Welcome. The Town's article talks about the critical study of blackness and study of Marxism, mentioning the strong tradition of Marxist analysts still existing in the communication and media studies. The article also mentions that black media should distribute a radical consciousness with the remaking Westernism and assuming internationalism, focusing on change. The article finishes with the saying, "The goal of the black studies was to mobilize the political, not radical, category of blackness towards worldwide revolution, which would, by default, benefit a world of people." The Carpentier article takes a look at different fantasies we see online and mentions how powerful participating online can be. We are introduced to the fantasy of universality and homogeneity of political, social, and cultural spaces, the fantasy of leadership and the social center, and the symbolic center fantasy. We also look at a case study on YouTube involving a documentary about the history of Cyprus and conclude that YouTube's interface provides a discursive celebration of participation and agency, inviting people to have their voices heard, which aligns it with the participatory and agency-driven fantasies. We see in the comment section Turks and Greeks arguing with each other, making their cases and voices heard. In episode 3 of Who Trolled Amber, we conclude that a lot of people contributed to the trolling of Amber Heard, with some contributing more than others. Johnny Depp's lawyer, Adam Waldman, is a focal point. While having ties to the Russian government, Waldman would reveal confidential information from the trial to a few quote-unquote journalists on YouTube who would make a profit off of trolling Amber while manipulating the info revealed in favor of Depp. In the end, we're reminded that if this can happen with a high-profile celebrity, imagine what can happen with a much bigger case, like this year's presidential election. With this week's readings, we're brought back to the idea of participation in the critical study of blackness and the critical study of Marxism. With the critical study of blackness in Armin Town's article, there's an interesting critique presented. Douglas critiques the public television services in the U.S. because their content was largely aimed at white people, even as black people have bought public television with their taxes. I relate what Douglas critiques here to women's sports being underrepresented in the media industry. As I mentioned before, women's sports received an average share of 15% of media coverage in 2022. In this case, the sports media content is being aimed at males with male-oriented content. Females play and watch sports too, let's not forget that. And it comes back to the hypocrisy of the fourth estate, where the media assures checks and balances in the government, but don't hold themselves accountable with the discrimination that takes place. Next, we look at Nico Carpentier's article and the different fantasies we see online and mention how powerful participating online can be. Nico mentions something interesting within his article. He concludes that YouTube's interface provides a discursive celebration of participation and agency, inviting people to have their voices heard, which aligns it with the participatory and agency-driven fantasies. Carpentier uses a controversial documentary as an example, and we see the arguments and debates occurring in the comment section, with people voicing their opinions. This same participation is seen on other social media platforms that can be used to target female athletes and figures who are more vulnerable. As I mentioned before, female athletes received 87% of all identified abuse during the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. This happened because of a lot of factors, but participation is one of them. People can voice their opinions, positive or negative, online towards anyone because of how the platforms are structured. The discussion of online participation brings me to episode 6 of Who Trolled Amber. It's concluded that not one specific person trolled Amber Heard, but it was a collective effort. We're left with a stark reminder of the advancement of technology. Imagine how much more significant this can become with a higher profile figure or event, like a presidential election. With all the trolling I've covered in these videos, it wasn't one person, but obviously a collective effort. But we are entering a unique period in sports. With it becoming such a lucrative business, people are getting more involved, and it's becoming more accessible to people. With that, the stakes are getting higher. There's more on the table now. With sports betting, tickets becoming more expensive, rule changes like NIL in college, sports are becoming more important by the day, and the trolling of athletes will only increase. In the end, these athletes are human. There's a person underneath that jersey, and it's only a game. It's never that serious.